Who remembers a series of videos I did last year about the developer of Libreboot, Leah doing a bit of trolling of some FSF members? This was a long story, but the TLDR is Libreboot is a BIOS/UEFI firmware replacement built off of the coreboot project. Now, traditionally, Libreboot didn't ship any binary blobs. That's why it was called Libreboot. Leah eventually decided to include certain key binary blobs to massively increase the hardware support. It doesn't have the range of binary blobs that coreboot has, but it does have a couple of important ones here and there. Now, as you would expect, the GNU FSF people didn't like this, and a couple of people decided to try and squat on the name Libreboot until they got bullied off of that name. As you might expect, the GNU and FSF people didn't exactly like this change because it was quite popular amongst that crowd, and some of them tried to squat on the domain Libreboot using a different TLD, but they still tried to take over that name. Eventually, Leah basically bullied them off of that name because she has that name, go make your own name. Then they forked the project off of an old version of Libreboot prior to the addition of the blobs. This became what is now known as Canoeboot. This is the repo on GNU Savannah. Now, Leah being Leah, if you've interacted with her, you'd know exactly what I mean here, decided not to just ignore this project and let them do their thing. Instead, wanted to crush this project and make sure nobody use it, so she made Canoeboot. Canoeboot is Libreboot minus any of the blobs. Basically, it is exactly what Canoeboot is, except it wasn't forked off of a really old version. This is released side by side with new Libreboot releases. So every single change made to Libreboot that isn't related to binary blobs is also made here. It goes without saying, but this is a much better project. Just to give you a bit of context about Leah, when she is working on Canoeboot, she refers to this as GNU Leah mode, and has this mental compartmentalization between real Leah and GNU Leah. Just to put things into perspective. At this point, Canoeboot is technically being developed, but just really slowly. Their last news post was back in December, their RC was back in September, and there is work going on the mailing list, but it's just not that much work. As of March right now, we have 2 series of patches. Alright, if we go back into April, there is a little bit more, so it's certainly a lot more than nothing. It's just not going very fast. Now you're probably wondering, after all this time, why are you talking about this? Well, now we move into the next phase of the plan. Now is the time to put the final nail in the coffin. After going ahead and rewording a lot of the website, removing the anti-FSF propaganda, replacing it with pro-FSF propaganda, now she made this. Should Canoeboot become GNU Canoeboot? That is the question I emailed to GNU's evaluation team today. In it, I make a strong case in support of membership, and I encourage members of the public to also voice their opinions about this topic. Therefore, I've publicized this link in several places. One of those places was my DMs, because that's usually what happens with something like this. Canoeboot is a special fork of Libreboot, maintained in parallel to it. Canoeboot adheres to the GNU Free System Distribution Guidelines, ensuring that everything in the Flash is free software. Canoeboot only supports a very limited subset of hardware from coreboot, which it uses for initialization, due to this policy. But it's provided for the purists who only want free software. The right to study, share, modify, and use software freely without restrictions is a fundamental right that everyone must have. The benefit of Canoeboot is that it provides a completely automated build process and installation procedure, with well-tested builds released on a regular basis that the user can simply install with minimal fuss. You can think of it as a coreboot distro. Coreboot provides snapshot source code archives every few months, but that's it. Coreboot gives you the ROM images pre-compiled with the source code and with payloads already pre-configured. In other words, Canoeboot makes coreboot extremely easy to use. Now, Leah has asked this in all the right places. FSF Libre Planet mailing list. This is where the email down below has been sent. Thread on her Mastodon account. Thread on the Tri-School forums. I will get back to this one in just a bit. And of course, over on Reddit. When I was first planning this video, there was no replies over on the mailing list. Now we have a couple, and this one here is by one of the developers of Canoeboot. We'll have a look at Leah's email first, and then come back to this. This is sent to the GNU eval team, but CC'd to others. My main recipient is the GNU eval team. I want GNU Canoeboot. This is my official contact with GNU as the lead developer and founder of the Canoeboot project, a fully free coreboot distro based on Libreboot. Can I just say, before we go any further, I really hate how this email is formatted. Why are you splitting lines in the middle of a word? Stop doing that, please. Canoeboot has recently removed all opposition to the FSF and decided to staunchly remote it instead, in addition to the FSDG. This is part of a general desire I've had since the start of the year to seek reconciliation with the FSF and GNU project after the drama that ensued, first with Libreboot.org versus Libreboot.at, and then Libreboot.org versus Canoeboot. This change is permanent, whether GNU accepts my proposal today, even if Canoeboot does not become GNU Canoeboot. It will continue to operate as it does now. I recently did a release which is staunchly pro-FSF. I've done this precisely because Canoeboot is no longer competition to Canoeboot in any way. This is going to be really easy for me to slip up on, so if I switch them back and forth, my apologies. Canoeboot seems to have stalled, so Canoeboot has, with this, moved to effectively replace it. I don't see this as an attack, but it is a fact that Canoeboot, as I write this, has not submitted anything to their main branch in over 4 months. It's now a dead project, and Canoeboot is taking over. Also, another Libre exit, Libreboot exit from GNU, will not occur. Canoeboot will be GNU forever if accepted. I never told anyone this before, and it's not an excuse, but it is a mitigating factor. I was going through a very difficult time in my life when Libreboot left GNU all those years ago. I was regularly drinking, and I was drunk when I originally sent those hostile messages to GNU in 2016. I'm not like that for years now. I don't drink anymore, and I don't do drugs, and I haven't done so for many years. Maybe at some point I should talk about the exit of Libreboot from GNU, because there is a very, very long story there. There is a lot of history between those two entities. I actually did initially try to help Canoeboot instead. The problem with Canoeboot is it's based on a really old Libreboot version and hasn't been changed much since, and they've basically been in development hell. I sent them extensive patches fixing build issues so that it builds on modern distros, and I sent them patches updating it to newer upstream revisions, e.g. coreboot, but none of my patches were reviewed. Now, to be fair, the patches that Leah sent basically just replaced the entire project with a newer version of the project, that being Canoeboot. I don't think the current developers are up to the task, and this is not an insult. They worked under me as Libreboot contributors in the past, and they only ever worked on minor tasks. They never did anything big. I've said in the past that perhaps I should be appointed as leader of Canoeboot instead, but I have my Canoeboot project, which has surpassed it technically in every way, and now I want GNU Canoeboot. According to Neox, one of the Canoeboot developers, Leah's patches actually were reviewed, some were rejected, and some were applied. Now, as for Canoeboot being less functional, he kind of agrees but disagrees on whether it matters. And what's the point? We're talking about firmware. The less it does sometimes, the better. I don't think that's true. We're not trying to compete on functionality, but we think for long-term maintenance and integrating GNU geeks and repairing RAM init on D16, for example, is much more efficient for us than supporting a lot of boards with a lot of functionality. Well, the problem is that if you don't support a lot of boards with a lot of functionality, then there's no reason to use your project because it's not going to work on the hardware they want to use it on. Now, the other emails here are basically just arguing amongst themselves. What I want to show you, though, is that forum post. So this is the announcement, should Canoeboot become GNU Canoeboot? This followed on from a prior discussion post. If I had to guess, there's probably 15 people that use this forum. As such, you might see a bit of overlap. Now, a lot of the people here also don't particularly like Leah, so we get some fun posts. Please remove Libre from Libreboot as Libreboot is not Libre, but Blobboot. Canoeboot is a horrible name. Why not call it GNU Start? I don't think that's a better name. Thank you for your work in the past, but Canoeboot is the future. That sounds like that future might be quite a while away. Furthermore, you've exhibited unstable behaviors in the past that it's best to avoid. Also, your Canoeboot page is almost a parody mocking free software and the FSF. No, specifically just mocking the FSF. Not the free software part, mocking the fact that the FSF doesn't actually support free software in the way they say they support free software. Whole nother story. Don't make us have to cite point by point how you ridiculed the free software movement with your so-called Libreboot. No, once again, just ridiculed the FSF. Over on the other thread, someone posted this link, which they posted as an archive, which didn't really need to be archived. That time, Cold Boot War is over. Canoeboot is a dead project. F Canoeboot. It served its purpose. Remember, this is Leah's project. This is a commit by Leah. I'll probably do a few more Canoeboot releases, but I don't want anyone hearing about it. Its only purpose was to one-up the GNU project when they started Canoeboot, after they previously tried to hostile fork Libreboot under the same name. Libreboot 1 and Canoeboot is inferior garbage. Again, this is Leah saying this. People should use Libreboot. Heads, Ownerboot, Mr. Chromebook, those are serious coreboot distros. Canoeboot and Canoeboot are pure garbage. I will not promote garbage. Again, Leah is talking about her project here. I stand by those statements. You've no need to use a Wayback link, because I'm proud to have written it. The original commit ID will remain intact. As I've said on IRC, the statements in that diff apply only when I'm working on Libreboot. I compartmentalize my thought process. The gist of it is this. When I'm working on Libreboot, what you get is the real Leah Rowe. When I work on Canoeboot, what you get is Leah Rowe in GNU Leah mode. I simply assume the correct position and act according to it. In this case, that position is GNU Free System Distribution Guidelines. I told you this is what she said. I didn't make this up. These are her own words. Jason, I find your attitude curious. I find it curious because you've previously criticized modern Libreboot policy, and rightfully so, since it contradicts your own. You are a leading member of the GNU Advisory Committee. Then you criticized Canoeboot because it was still saying bad things about the FSF, and it said things like Canoeboot is garbage, even going so far as to have back to Libreboot in the link menu on the top of every page. But now Canoeboot has been modified so the website staunchly promotes both the FSF and GNU policy, saying nothing negative about it at all. Reference to GNU FSDG is littered throughout the site in a positive way, and it no longer tells the user to switch to Libreboot. Canoeboot was always 100% free software core boot distribution, devoid of any and all binary blobs, but initially showed hostility towards the FSF and the FSDG. When I said Leah acting like Leah, this should give you a good example of what I mean. This is what my DMs sometimes look like. It's just spread across like 30 different messages though. Because the entity called Leah Rowe is running it, you still wish to oppose it. There's just no pleasing you, is there, Jason? To be sure, what I'm expressing here is amusement. I'm neither disappointed nor insulted. You are entitled to your views. I digress. Happy hacking. To which Jason says, that's quite a lot to read into posting of a link. And now we go full Leah. Unlike your masters, I speak plainly and honestly, and I do things I say I'll do. I don't try to stab people in the back or do things behind the scenes. Your people initially tried to steal the name Libreboot for their own project, and you were contacting my people behind my back, trying to recruit them. But they were loyal to me, because they know they can trust me, and told me about it. Since you like publishing links, here's one. This was their fork announcement when they tried to steal the Libreboot name. I responded by doing a release 4 hours before Dennis did this talk, and then doing multiple releases with as aggressive development as possible for the rest of that year, completely outpacing GNU at every turn. Perhaps one day I'll tell the real story of how the FSF has repeatedly tried to unseat me from the Libreboot project for years, every time I've rebuked them and come back 10 times stronger. There are no private mailing lists in the Libreboot project or the Canoeboot project. You sit on private mailing lists like GNU Prog Discuss, safe in the knowledge that the public cannot see you. I do everything on IRC, openly, and all are welcome to join. Every decision I make is on the website and discussed on IRC. Then it is implemented in the public Git repository. I am not a hypocrite either. You may disagree with how I think and act, but again, at least I'm honest. Your people promote people and projects entirely contrary to your own policy. Many of the people in your inner circle do not practice what they preach. The reason I don't get promoted is because I'm honest and because I say these things. Your people once said I'm unpredictable. This is GNU Speak, which is obviously a play on Newspeak. I do not answer to Richard Stallman. I speak entirely for myself. I am free in the ways that you are not. When I say F you, I do it publicly. I just did. But if your people ever decide to work with me again in the future, I'll gladly think about it. I'm a pragmatist by nature, and I think about what's good for my projects. If only your people were competent. GNU Boot's developers are incompetent, pompous assholes. They haven't committed anything in their main branch for over 4 months as I write this, whereas I just did 3 releases in less than 2 weeks. All provocation aside, here is a patch. Is Canoeboot ever gonna become GNU Canoeboot? What do you think? Probably not. But if it did, you know I'm gonna do another video. So let me know your thoughts down below. Have you ever used Libreboot? Are you a Canoeboot user? Did you even know that Canoeboot was being made? I would love to know. And how many times did I switch around the words and not realize? Let me know. So if you liked the video, go like the video. And if you really liked the video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patreon, subscribes, Librepay linked in the description down below. That's going to be it for me, and I just want to boot.